Some people think that seeing beyond is a gift, a blessing, but no one tells you the price it comes with. When you start seeing what others don't, the lies, the illusions, the emptiness behind appearances, something changes inside you. Suddenly, everything that seemed normal becomes uncomfortable. Conversations seem empty. People seem trapped in a theater you can no longer pretend to believe. And the worst part? You can't unsee. Once your mind awakens, there's no going back. This video is for those who feel like they carry a weight that no one understands. For those who feel out of place, disconnected, as if they see a reality that the rest of the world insists on denying. Let's talk about high price of being awakened, the emotional, spiritual, and even physical cost of seeing what others can't. But we'll also reveal why this price is worth it, and how this pain can become your greatest freedom. If you're tired of pretending, if you feel like the world has lost its meaning, and that the people around you seem to be sleeping, then you need to hear what comes next. Because understanding this changes everything. How you view suffering, silence, loneliness, and even your own existence. Get ready, because after this video, you'll never look at the world the same way again. Now you understand what few have the courage to see, and it changes everything. After hearing this, you'll never again feel strange for thinking differently. You realize that the loneliness of awakening is part of the process, and that the pain that once distanced you from others now brings you closer to the truth. This content has made you see life differently, and that's why it needs to reach more people. Like and subscribe to the channel to continue this journey with those who are also awakening. Here, each video is a new piece of this puzzle that is transforming you from within. Have you ever noticed that the more you understand things, the harder it seems to live among others? It's as if suddenly the whole world has become too small for you. Conversations that once distracted you now seem empty. People talk about plans, status, money, success, and it all sounds so superficial that you start to wonder, is it me who's changed, or has the world always been this way and I just didn't notice? That's when the true weight of seeing what others don't begins. And it's not a light weight. It's the kind of weight that makes you look at everything and feel a mix of clarity and loneliness. Because when you see too much, you lose your illusion, and living without illusion hurts. It's curious how awakening happens. Sometimes there's nothing mystical about it, just a series of small disappointments, situations that make you realize that the life everyone is racing to achieve doesn't make much sense after all. You begin to realize that the success they sold you is just a race with no finish line, that the love they promised you isn't that fairy tale, and that people are always trying to fill voids that never close. Waking up to this is a shock, and that's why those who begin to see beyond feel out of place. You begin to wonder if there's something wrong with you, because the rest of the world seems so comfortable lying to itself. And that's where the first price lies. You no longer fit into conversations, groups, and circles of friends. Suddenly, being surrounded by people feels as alone as being alone. It's as if you've started to see the gears turning behind the theater, and now you can no longer pretend to believe in the show. This is what Alan Watts brilliantly explained when he said that most people live believing they are the character, not the actor. But when you realize you're on stage, the play loses some of its charm. You understand that the whole world revolves around masks, and that's why everything starts to seem artificial. But there's something important here. Seeing what others don't see doesn't make you better than anyone else. It just makes you more aware and therefore more alone. It's like being in a room full of people sleeping. You even try to wake them, but they won't open their eyes. And then you have to choose, go back to sleep just to fit in, or stay awake even though you know it hurts. And that's where the second price comes in, incomprehension. The people around you won't understand what's changed in you. They'll say you're distant, cold, disconnected. But deep down, the opposite has happened. You're more alive than ever, only now you can see what they still can't face. Maybe you've felt this before. That moment when you try to explain something profound and people look at you with that blank look as if to say, here you go, complicating the simple. But it's not complication, it's lucidity. It's realizing how much people cling to routines, titles, and appearances to avoid facing the emptiness that exists within. And when you realize this, it's impossible to unsee. This is the cruelest part of seeing the invisible. You gain a vision that can no longer be turned off. Everything that previously went unnoticed begins to scream before your eyes. The falsehood, the haste, the subtle lies. Everything is revealed with painful clarity. But at the same time something shifts within you. You begin to feel a strange calm. It's as if, amidst the chaos of the world, you begin to understand that the chaos has always been there, and that trying to control it is futile. Alan Watts said that life is like music. It's not about reaching the end, but about enjoying every note. And that's exactly what begins to make sense to you. While others rush to achieve something, you begin to slow down. You begin to observe more, speak less, feel more. But this new perspective comes at a cost. The more you understand life, the further you distance yourself from those who don't yet understand. And perhaps that's why many awakenings are accompanied by a period of silence. A silence that isn't empty, but filled with observation. You begin to notice how trapped people are in roles they didn't choose, in lives they don't love, and in patterns that only exist because no one ever stopped to question them. Seeing this is liberating, but it's also sad. Because you wish everyone could see what you see now, but you realize that everyone has their own time, and that's where most give up. Many people prefer to close their eyes and return to ignorance, because the weight of the truth can be unbearable for those who haven't yet learned to deal with it. But you didn't back down, and that's why you're here listening to this now, because deep down you know that seeing what others don't see is a calling, an invitation to stop living by appearances and start living consciously. It's a change that hurts at first, but eventually transforms everything. So tell me in the comments, so I know you really understood this part. Write the word awake. I want to see who is really on this journey. And the strangest thing is that even with all this weight, there's something inside you that doesn't want to let go of this new perspective. Because amidst all this pain, there's a strange feeling of truth. It's as if the world is finally starting to make sense, even if nothing else seems the same. And that's when the story changes completely, because what comes after seeing is even more intense than the awakening itself. And that's exactly where the hardest part of all this begins. Loneliness. That feeling of being surrounded by people, and at the same time, feeling like no one really understands you. You begin to see the world more deeply, but the deeper you look, the shallower the places where people are seen. Conversations revolve around things that no longer nourish you. Laughter sounds forced, and the presence of too many people becomes more tiring than comforting. The awakened learn, the hard way, that seeing what others don't see comes at a high cost, the loss of a sense of belonging. At first you try to fit in, you feign interest, try to participate in the same conversations, laugh at the same jokes, be part of the same groups, but deep down, you know you don't fit in anymore, and what once brought you pleasure, parties, dates, distractions, starts to leave you empty. It's as if awakening has robbed you of the ability to distract yourself with the superficial. Alan Watts said that when a person awakens, they realize that life is a kind of game, and that most are so stuck in the rules that they forget they can leave the board. And when you realize this, the game loses its fun. You start to see people competing for validation, status, attention, and it all seems so obvious it's painful to watch. But loneliness isn't just physical, it's mental. It's when you try to explain something that seems clear to you, and the other person only receives blank stares. It's when you share a thought, and it's seen as negative, trippy, too difficult. You feel like someone who's woken up in the middle of a collective dream. Everyone else is asleep, dreaming of success, appearances, approval, and you're there, awake, trying to figure out what to do with this awareness that no one seems to want to have. And the cruelest part is realizing you can't sleep again. Over time, this solitude becomes a kind of shield. You begin to prefer silence to the wrong company, sincerity to acceptance, depth to comfort. You learn to be alone without feeling lonely, and this confuses people. They call you cold, detached, distant. But what they don't know is that this distance is your way of preserving your peace. You're not escaping the world, you're protecting yourself from it. Alan Watts talked about how human beings fear silence because it reveals who we truly are. And when you learn to listen to this silence, you realize it speaks louder than any crowd. But there's a curious twist here. After so long feeling different, you begin to understand that loneliness isn't punishment. It's part of the process. It's the space the universe creates for you to find yourself. Because when you're surrounded by noise, it's impossible to hear what comes from within. It's in this emptiness that you listen to yourself, that you reconnect, that you understand that being awakened isn't about being better, it's about being truer. And this truth, even though it's painful, is what sets you free. But there's an inevitable moment, the one when loneliness begins to test you, when the silence weighs heavily, when the absence of company begins to bother you, when your ego tries to convince you that you need to return to the crowd to feel alive. And that's when many give up. They confuse solitude with isolation and end up erasing what they've achieved just to fit back in where they don't belong. But there's a secret to all this, something that separates those who are just waking up from those who truly transform. And that's what you'll understand now, because what happens when you try to go back to sleep is something no one prepares you for. There comes a point when you realize there's no going back. And this is perhaps one of the most painful parts of seeing what others don't, because no matter how much you try, you can't unsee. You can't pretend you didn't understand. You can't fit into something that no longer makes sense. You begin to realize that ignorance was truly a form of comfort, and that awareness exacts a high price. It's as if awakening were a door that opens from within, and once you've walked through, you can never close it again. At first, the urge to deny what you feel hits you. You try to go back to being who you were, do what you used to do, talk to the same people, and force yourself to believe you still fit in. But something inside you already knows it's no longer possible. It's like trying to fit into a garment that has shrunk. The mind can pretend, but the spiritual body won't allow it. Alan Watts used to say that trying to return to ignorance is like trying to unbutton experience. And he was right. You can't unexperience an awakening. What has been seen, felt, and understood transforms everything around you, including yourself. That's where the confusion arises. You start to live between two worlds, the old where everything seemed easier, and the new where everything is truer but also heavier. Sometimes you miss the unconscious, the time when things were simple, even if false. But now you see what lies behind. Appearances, and this clarity is impossible to erase. That's why so many people who awaken go into crisis. The mind tries to adapt, the heart feels the impact, and the body reacts. It's the price of lucidity, and anyone who's been through it knows. It's like waking up in the middle of the night in a dark room, not knowing where you are but certain that you can't go back to sleep. You begin to realize that the world isn't what it seems, that most of the things people call important are just distractions. That much of suffering comes from a resistance to accepting what is. It's as if you finally understood the game of life and realized it was never about winning, but about playing consciously. But understanding this distances you from those still caught up in the competition. People keep running, fighting, competing, and you just watch, with a mixture of compassion and exhaustion. And then, in the midst of this turmoil, a cruel doubt arises. Is awakening really worth it? Because the peace everyone promises seems to be accompanied by intense loneliness and an uncomfortable lucidity. You realize that the more you understand life, the more it challenges you. And it's at this point that the ego tries to pull you back, saying, go back to comfort, go back to illusion, go back to how you were before. But the truth is, you no longer fit there. You can even try to deceive yourself, but the soul already knows too much. Awakening isn't a fairy tale. It's an earthquake. It shatters everything that was safe, everything that was predictable, and forces you to rebuild yourself from scratch. And the worst part is, no one warns you about this. They talk about consciousness, light, elevation, but they forget to tell you that chaos comes first. That light only arrives after you face your own shadow. Alan Watts said, you can't have the top of the mountain without the bottom of the valley. And that's exactly what you're beginning to understand. Awakening doesn't lead you directly to peace. It rips you out of the lie and then teaches you what true peace is. And the more you try to resist, the more life shows you there's no going back. It's as if the universe is saying, now that you've seen it, you're going to have to live up to that vision. And that's scary, because living awake requires courage. Courage to let go, to get lost, to be misunderstood, to not belong. It's the point at which you realize you can no longer hide behind old versions of yourself. You've changed, and nothing you try to do will erase that change. Perhaps that's why so many people feel a huge void after awakening. It's the transition between the old and the new, between the familiar and the real. It's a silent mourning for the person you were, for the beliefs that comforted you, and for the illusions that kept you at peace. But deep down, this pain is the beginning of reconstruction. It's the price you pay for opening your eyes. And the curious thing is that, after a while, you realize this price has a reason, that all this feeling of loss, of misfit, and of rupture is taking you to a place few have the courage to go, the point where you finally learn to let go. And it's precisely at that moment, when you begin to let go of what won't come back, that true transformation begins. There comes a time when you understand that awakening isn't just about seeing differently, it's about learn to let go. Let go of everything that holds you back, everything that limits you, everything that no longer makes sense even if it hurts. And it does. It hurts because you begin to lose your attachment to certainties, to people, to routines that once gave you security. It's as if the universe forces you to let go, one piece at a time, until you realize that nothing truly belongs to you. And it's at this point that many feel fear, because you can no longer control anything. But what seems like loss is actually liberation. You begin to realize that, behind the need for control, there has always been a fear, the fear of losing ground, but awakening tears away that ground and teaches you to walk without it. Alan Watts said, "Life is like swimming. You only sink when you try to hold on." And that's exactly it. The more you try to control, the more you drown. But when you learn to float, to trust the movement, everything changes. Detachment isn't about being cold. It's about understanding that the flow of life knows the way better than you do. And the funny thing is, at first you try to resist. You want to hold on to the people who distance themselves, the plans that fall apart, the certainties that slip away. But there comes a time when you can't anymore. You realize that some people aren't leaving by accident. They're being pushed aside to make room for something new. And that hurts because attachment is part of our nature. You want to hold on to what was good for you, even if it no longer fits. But the universe doesn't negotiate. When it's time to let go, it takes it from your hands. And the more you mature spiritually, the more you understand that detachment is the true test. It shows how much you truly trust life. Because it's easy to talk about faith when everything is in place. It's difficult to have faith when the ground disappears. Alan Watts explained that the human problem is trying to hold the breath of life. We want everything to remain still, safe, predictable, but existence is movement. And fighting against this is what creates suffering. When you accept the flow, you discover that you don't need to control anything to be at peace. You start to look back and realize that many of the things you once thought were losses were actually liberations in disguise. The friendship that drifted apart, the job that ended, the relationship that ended, all of this was pushing you to a new level of consciousness. The problem is, in the midst of the pain, we don't see it. But as time passes, you realize that nothing is gone. Without a reason, everything that leaves your life leaves to make way for what truly aligns with your new vibration. And the curious thing is that the more you let go, the lighter you become. That need to prove something to someone disappears. You stop seeking approval because you understand that the one who needs to believe in you is yourself. You stop trying to control the future because you realize that the present already contains everything you need. And when this awareness awakens, something changes within you. Anxiety diminishes, fear loses its power, and peace begins to appear, not as a miracle but as a consequence. But of course, detachment isn't something that happens all at once. It comes gradually, in small daily lessons. Sometimes in simple things, like not responding to provocation, not insisting on someone who walks away, not trying to understand what's already clear. Other times, in big decisions, quitting a job, moving to a new city, ending a cycle. And the best part is that after a while you realize you haven't lost anything. You've simply returned to the universe what was no longer yours. Over time, what once seemed like loneliness begins to transform into freedom. You begin to enjoy your own company, to respect silence, to understand that emptiness is also a sacred space. And that's when you realize the true meaning of detachment. It's not about ceasing to love things. It's about ceasing to depend on them to feel whole. When you understand this, the world stops frightening you. You begin to walk lightly, confidently, with that feeling that you are exactly where you need to be, even without knowing where you're going. And it's precisely at this point, when you finally learn to float, when you stop fighting the current and start trusting the flow, that something amazing happens. Because it's in this space of letting go that life reveals what's always been hidden, the beauty behind pain, the meaning in loss, and the true power of being awake. And it's this discovery that the next step will show you, the moment when pain transforms into something you never imagined. It's funny how pain changes its appearance when you begin to understand it. At first, everything seems like a punishment, the loneliness, the emptiness, the feeling of being lost. But after a while you realize that this pain has a purpose. It's as if it's carving you up from the inside, taking away what isn't yours, removing the excess until only the essential remains. And that's when you begin to see the beauty hidden in pain. What once made you suffer now teaches you. What once seemed like the end now seems like the beginning. You begin to look back and realize that everything that broke you actually built you. The disappointments, the losses, the silences, it all brought you here. And this is the point where you understand that awakening was never about running from pain, but about moving through it. Alan Watts said that trying to escape suffering is suffering itself. And he was right. Peace is not born from escape but from acceptance. It's when you stop fighting life and start dancing with it that things fall into place. And the curious thing is that when you accept pain, it changes form. It stops being an enemy and becomes a teacher. You begin to realize that each difficulty has taught you something: patience, detachment, compassion, strength. Situations that once made you feel small now show you how much you've grown. It's at this point that the awakened understand the value of what they've experienced and begin to see that nothing was in vain, that even the darkest days were part of a larger process of inner refinement. When you learn to look at life from this perspective, things lose their weight. Problems still exist, but they no longer bring you down. People can hurt you, but you don't lose yourself in them. Chaos may arrive, but now, you know it, too will pass. Alan Watts explained that life is like the ocean, full of waves, some gentle, some violent. But the secret is to remember that you are not the wave, you are the sea. And this awareness changes everything, because whoever understands this understands that pain and joy are part of the same movement. And it's precisely this understanding that begins to free you. Pain ceases to be a burden and becomes a sign of growth. You realize that every discomfort is an invitation to know yourself better, that every loss is an opportunity to rebuild yourself with more truth, that every silence brings you closer to what's real, and suddenly that emptiness that once frightened you begins to bring you peace. You stop chasing distractions and start looking within, and it's there that you find everything you've always sought outside. You begin to perceive the beauty in simple things: a sunset, a hot cup of coffee, a sincere look, the sound of rain. Everything takes on new meaning, because when the mind slows down, the heart can finally see. And it's in this state that you understand what Alan Watts meant when he said, life is just the dance of energy. Nothing stands still. Everything changes. Everything passes. Pain, fear, sadness, everything comes to transform you, not destroy you. And you know what's most liberating? It's that when you stop running from pain, it loses its power over you. It still exists, but it no longer dominates you. You begin to trust the process more, to understand that each failure is a push in the right direction. And what once made you suffer now makes you mature. You realize that pain has made you more human, more empathetic, more aware. And that's why, deep down, all suffering has a hidden beauty, because it reveals a part of you that only awakens in difficulty. But something even more profound happens after this point. When the pain finally stops controlling you, something inside you changes completely. You begin to see the world with new eyes, with more lightness, with more compassion. And it's at this moment that you understand the true price of seeing what others don't, living awake in a sleeping world. And that's when the journey takes on new meaning, because what comes after this awareness is the greatest challenge of all. There comes a time when you realize that the true price of seeing what others don't see is living awake in a world that still sleeps. It's looking around and realizing that most people are still trapped in the illusions you've already overcome, believing that happiness is always somewhere in the future, in something they need to achieve, buy, or prove. And you, who have already understood that none of this fulfills, feel a mixture of compassion and weariness, because it's hard to see so many people searching for meaning in the same lies you once believed. It's like watching a movie whose ending you already know, only no one else notices the repetitive script. Being awakened is like carrying a lighthouse within you, but being surrounded by people who complain about the darkness. You try to illuminate, you try to show the way, but you realize that not everyone is ready to see, and that's where the most painful part comes in. You understand that you can't force anyone to awaken. Each person has their own time, and awakening can't be pushed. It can only be experienced. Alan Watts said, "You can't force a flower to bloom before its time." And that's exactly it. The awakened learn to respect the rhythm of life, even when the urges to scream at everyone to open their eyes. But the hardest part of living awake is maintaining balance. It's continuing to feel love in a world that mistakes coldness for wisdom. It's continuing to believe in good even when evil seems to prevail. It's maintaining faith when all seems lost. Because once you see the truth, you can't go back to who you were, but you can't isolate yourself completely either. You need to learn to walk between both worlds, that of spirit and that of matter, that of inner silence and that of human noise. And that's where the awakened are truly tested. Living awake requires a quiet strength. You learn to listen more and talk less, to observe before reacting, to choose carefully where you place your energy. People may think you've become distant, but in reality you've simply become more aware. You no longer engage in pointless arguments. You no longer waste energy on those who don't want to understand. You no longer try to convince anyone, because you've realized that true teaching comes from example, not words. This is what Alan Watts called the wisdom of flow. You don't fight the world, you simply flow with it, without getting lost in the confusion. And little by little, this new way of existing gives you a different kind of peace. It's not a peace that depends on absolute silence or a perfect environment. It's a peace that comes from within, the certainty that, even in a world full of noise, you can remain whole. You realize that life doesn't need to be understood to be lived, that not everything needs an answer, that some things just need to be felt. The awakened learn to find meaning in the absurd, and that is what sets them free. But make no mistake, this freedom comes at a high price, because the more awareness you gain, the more responsibility comes with it. You realize that you can't blame anyone, that everything that happens is a reflection of your own vibration, your choices, your thoughts. It's heavy at first, understanding that you create your own. Reality is a huge burden, but it's also the turning point, because deep down that's what gives you back your power. And the most beautiful thing is that, even with all this burden, the awakened one continues to believe, continues to love, help, and care, because deep down he understands that the world sleeps, but it is not lost. And that's what keeps him going, the hope that, in time, more people will wake up. He no longer lives to prove anything, nor to change anyone. He lives to be an example of conscience in the midst of confusion. Now you understand the true weight and value of seeing what others don't. This content opened your eyes to something that's always been there, but that you might not have realized yet. The pain of awakening isn't a punishment, it's the beginning of freedom. And when this awareness arrives, everything changes. What once made you suffer now makes sense. What once seemed like confusion now transforms into clarity. If this touched you in any way, it's because the message was meant for you, and that's why it's worth sharing this light with more people. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel to continue this journey with me, because the next video will show you what happens after that you awaken. And that's the point that changes everything. Write the word in the comments, lucidity, so I know you're ready to take the next step. What comes next is the kind of revelation no one tells you, but you'll understand exactly when you watch it.